you, and we have a very interesting and important topic about narcissism and relationships and how that might impact you. Joining us to discuss this is Rachana Buxani. She is a licensed mental health therapist. Thank you, doctor, for joining us on what really is a topic that I think a lot of people might want to shy away from having a conversation with, but at one point we might find ourselves in a relationship with somebody who has some narcissistic tendencies or characteristics, and it's not the easiest to navigate.
Absolutely. I agree. First of all, Julie, thank you for having me. And I agree. We in the field tend to think that narcissism has now become almost a public health issue because there are so many people with narcissism. And then, of course, those few who've been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. But, the trick about narcissism is that it affects people around much more than it affects the narcissists themselves. So, we just see those lasting effects. And that's kind of why I wanted to write about this, because I just see so many people struggling.
Well, the book is called Unseen, and that's such an important point right there, is the narcissist isn't as concerned as much. That's probably by definition one of the characteristics of a narcissist. It's the rest of us that feel that impact, and they're kind of a little, not empathetic about how that gets to others as well. But when we say narcissist, not all narcissism, you say in your book, Unseen, looks the same. So what are the different characteristics of narcissism? What are the differences between one and another?
Sure. So the DSM, which is a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, when it talks about narcissistic personality disorder, it really just talks about one kind, which is the grandiose narcissist. And so that's the one that's very entitled, very charming, again, very grandiose, larger than life personality, manipulative, like a deep, deep sense of entitlement. And that's one kind of narcissist, but there's so many others. And one that particularly stands out is really what we call the vulnerable narcissist. And that's kind of the one that gets missed many times because it doesn't look so that, a vulnerable narcissist doesn't present like a grandiose narcissist. They have the same arrogance and entitlement of the grandiose, but the way they present is very victim, very woe is me, very, the world is being so unfair with me. So they present as being almost like, socially awkward or introverted, and also not very confident. So that's the vulnerable narcissist. But we have, some others. We have the self-righteous narcissist that kind of, gets their narcissistic supply from being very morally right, but then they also hold everybody else to those standards. You have the neglectful narcissist that, basically for them, nobody else exists. So it's all I, me, myself, and it doesn't matter who else is in their life. They are very neglectful towards those relationships and those people. And then, of course, you have the communal narcissist, which is a person who is going out there and doing so many good things, but all for the glory of doing those things. So, if they don't get praised or if they don't get validated, they get extremely upset. And all of these in their own way are so detrimental to the people who may have, narcissistic people in their lives, because it's for instance, the communal narcissist, it's so difficult for a child of a communal narcissist because everybody else in the community is like, oh, but your dad is so good, your mom is so good. Look at how much they do, to serve the community. But then there are different people in the house. So it's just so devastating to see these victims.
Okay, let's touch on that right there, because that's what your book really addresses as well, as the narcissism within the family structure. What are some of the roles of the children? As you just mentioned, maybe, people think the dad's wonderful, but he's got some really strong narcissistic characteristics and plays the role that he has in the family. How does that impact the children and their role?
Sure. So, Julie, these roles are either assigned by the parents themselves or they are adopted a means of survival for the child. Some of those roles that children are put into, or like I said, they adopt, is the golden child. We've all heard about the golden child. So the golden child is kind of the mirror image of the narcissist parent, and it's an extension. So the narcissist sees this child an extension of himself or herself, and that's why they put this child on a pedestal. Again, comes with its own level of stress and insecurity, because the pedestal is only given to this child as long as they're ready to conform to the narcissistic parent. Some of the other roles are the scapegoat. I tend to think the scapegoat is the child that, we all have something about ourselves that we really don't like. And whatever that is for the narcissist, if they see that characteristic in one of the children, that's the one they're going to pick to be the scapegoat, because it's really something that they hate about themselves. And when they see that in a child, they pick that child to be the scapegoat, and that child kind of bears the brunt of everything that's ever going to go wrong in that family. We then have the invisible child, which is what my client is in her family system. And that's why the book is called Unseen, because she really wasn't seen by her parents. The invisible child is kind of just there. They just exist. Whether they're there or not there, I don't think it makes a difference to the parent at all, or to the family system for that matter. So that's the invisible child. Other than that, you have the peacemaker or the fixer. That the job of those children is really to kind of make sure there's no chaos. So they'll do whatever they can do, clean up before dad gets back home, get the food ready before mom gets back home, do whatever it takes so that there's peace in the family. There's also the truth seer. And then sometimes a truth seer becomes a truth teller. It's that one child who kind of sees everything that's going on and knows that, okay, this is not okay. There's something really dysfunctional about this family. So that's the truth seer. And then you also have the role of the adherent, which is a child who kind of just goes along with it, because it's easier to just say, it's okay, everything is okay, whatever's going on is okay. So they just kind of conform to whatever's happening with the family. A thing to note, though, Julie, is that it's not, you can have one child playing multiple roles at the same time or at different times in their life. So sometimes the invisible child can become the scapegoat, because if the invisible child is also the one who's seeing the truth, the day they express it, that child can become the scapegoat. So these are the roles that children keep sort of, going in and out of in those narcissistic family systems.
Not that to say that my parents were narcissistic, that's not the case, but going through those different labels, I still think at some degree we all kind of experience that a little bit. Like I was definitely the peacekeeper in my family between my sisters and my parents, and how that really kind of impacts a lot of my life going forward in the family dynamic. But if your parents are narcissistic, or maybe your brother or a sister, that really makes it much more impressionable on you and how you yourself choose to function in relationships that you have outside of that family dynamic. Now, your book is written from the perspective of one patient, and you've described so many different types of narcissism out there. Why did you decide to go with the view from just one of your patients?
So I wanted to add a little humanness to the book, Julie, because most of the books that have been written about, mental disorders or, the challenges that people face, a lot of them are written very prescriptive. So I really wanted people to see the human cost of when, a child comes from one of those family systems and what it does. But I also wanted to give them hope, because her journey is so empowering, and when she reaches the other end of that, right, where she goes through the healing process with me, and where then she has a great relationship with her husband and her children, and she's finally able to live her life rather than just survive, which is what she was doing before. I just thought it was such a beautiful journey, and I did not know a better way of putting it forward than her story.
And it's a very beautiful and yet complicated story as well. But you also describe a lot of the different types of empathy that you have with this. You have cognitive, emotional, compassionate. How does all of that differ?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So cognitive empathy is empathy that I know I should have, right? So it's a thought of process. Like for instance, if I see a homeless person, I know I should feel bad. I mean, if I watch a sad movie, I know that okay, I should probably feel sad about this. So there's that intellect that's telling me that okay, there's things that we should feel bad about. So that's the cognitive empathy. The emotional empathy is one level higher, where you not only understand that this is something sad, but you actually feel sad. You feel for the person. You can put yourselves in their shoes, and that's the emotional empathy. The highest form of empathy is the compassionate empathy, where you not only feel for that person, but you actually want to do something to help. So you take that extra step to help the person out. So that's the compassionate empathy. And that's where it's very confusing with narcissists, because when I sit with clients, again, victims of narcissistic abuse, it's very confusing because narcissists actually have cognitive empathy. They know when to feel bad. They don't feel bad for you, but they know that, okay, this is a situation that I probably should, come up with some tears. So they can put that on and off when they want.
It's a manipulation, right?
It is.
And it's them feeding into their narcissism of being able to work the situation to what's going to benefit them, not you at all. And it just is another level of narcissism and a trauma that can be caused to the person that's in that relationship or having to interact with that individual. You can really have trauma from a narcissistic relationship, but it might not be the same as a car accident. It might not be the same as something else you could experience in life, yet there are still some similarities. Tell us a little bit about the trauma that people experience.
So I'll tell you something, Julie, and I think the main difference is the difference between the acute and the chronic, right? So, with narcissistic trauma, it kind of goes on for years. So this is not something that's happening once, like, you have an accident, and yes, you can experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress, because of the accident, but it's an acute thing. So because there's that one incident that's caused it, and then you can, begin your healing process. The complication with the narcissistic trauma is that it goes on for years and years of your life. So it's like drip, slow trauma that's going on, for your entire childhood. So it's chronic and it's relationship based. So, the reason why personality disorders like narcissism are so important to understand is because they affect the relationships that the person ends up having. And so these traumas are relationship traumas, unlike something like an accident, which, again, has nothing to do with your relationships. So, it's a very different kind of trauma when you are hurt by the very people that you need to be able to trust, to be able to have healthy relationships growing up. So that just makes it so much more difficult to have any healthy relationships.
So how do you heal from something like that? If you're dealing with trauma from a car accident, you might go through physical therapy, but also there might be a fear of getting in the car again. When you're in a relationship like this and you don't want to keep it carrying over so you can avoid having to experience that again, or maybe repeating the relationship with the same kind of person that might just look different and have a different name, what's the healing process?
So I think the first step is going to be psychoeducation, and that's a tricky one. When we get clients who come in, and I've been doing this for so long that I tell my team, I said I can sniff people out after all these years of working with victims of narcissistic abuse. So when somebody comes in and there is a pattern in that relationship that they're talking about, I know that there's a possibility that they're dealing with a narcissist. However, they might not be ready to listen to it. Like in her case, it was a very slow process for me to even, label it or start talking about, okay, maybe this is what is going on. And maybe, your dad was or is a narcissist. So I think the first part is psychoeducation, and that's really 50% of it. And it's a slow process, like I said, because it's a push and pull. After that, we work on radical acceptance, because here's the thing. The goal when somebody comes to me is never going to be that leave the relationship. I mean, if it's a romantic partner, the goal is never going to be, that's a goal that they can set for themselves. My goal is going to be for them to understand that, listen, this is how it's going to be. This is going to be the pattern of them, gaslighting, devaluing, then love bombing, then the hoovering, that, those are patterns of a narcissistic relationship. So if you can accept that, and maybe sometimes people do need to be in those relationships. And again, now for her, it's her father, and then, there's she's also got a mother who's, who she's close to. So she can't break that relationship with her father. And so we teach them to navigate those relationships by teaching them techniques, by teaching them how to regulate their own system when they're around, those people. Also, what to do after you've had one of those meetings with, a narcissistic parent, because you need to give yourself time after every one of those meetings to actually be able to heal. So you need to offer yourself that compassion, offer yourself that care. Additionally, I think things like teaching them to ungaslight themselves, right? Because this is what they have learned throughout their life. Every emotion has been invalidated, minimized. So, and then at a certain point, they start doing it to themselves. So learning how to, ungaslight, learning, to cope with the grief, because it's so, you're grieving the loss of a childhood, you're grieving the loss of a relationship that never was. So there's so much of grief and sadness involved. So, of course, holding them while they go through all of that. And then forgiveness, if they so choose to, not a requirement, but if they so choose to forgive, then, working with them through that process.
I think the forgiveness is so important in healing, but a narcissist is not going to ask for forgiveness, right? It's something you're just going to have to willingly give because you yourself want to have that freedom. But holding on to it, it really only hurts you. It's not going to hurt the narcissist, but it's such a hard step and such an important step.
Yes, but here's the thing, Julie, the current research on forgiving narcissists, and especially, let's talk about partners who are narcissistic. So if you're in a relationship with an abusive person, forgiveness is actually contraindicated, because every time you forgive, you're actually giving a pass to the partner to keep, perpetuating that abuse cycle. But in this case, like with the parent, where maybe you've moved out, like in her case, she's married, she has a life, she has kids, she has a successful career. If they choose to walk down that path of forgiveness, and of course we help them do that.
Thank you so much. This is a topic that I think a lot of people may not be comfortable talking about, especially if it's within a family dynamic, if it's your father or your mother or your brother or your sister, or even just your partner that you're spending some time with, on being able to navigate that so you can break some unhealthy habits and move forward in a fantastic, in a healthy way.
And actually, I'm going to tell everybody who's listening that if you suspect that you are in one of those relationships, healing is possible. And it's a beautiful journey. It's a painful journey, but a beautiful journey to go on. And I would highly, recommend that anyone who suspects that they've maybe come from a toxic family system to go on that journey, because that's a journey not only of healing, but actually learning how to love yourself.
So important. Thank you so much. Again, the book is called Unseen. It's by Rachana Buxani. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise on this important topic. We'll be back on Fox Weekend Live after this short break.